during the month of June, we are doing this series on greatest hits in the Bible. And so we've been looking at some of the great passages, the passages that have been loved all through the years, that have been treasured by people. So we started with Psalm 23, the greatest, one of the greatest pieces of literature that was ever written in history, and one that so many people, it's meant so much to them. And then we went to Romans, specifically Romans chapter 3, which is kind of the theological heart of the New Testament and thus in the whole Bible. Last week, on Father's Day, we talked about the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father, and we had a good time studying that together. Now today, we are tackling kind of a different subject, and that is we are looking at a challenge, the Matthew 25 challenge. In fact, in this service today, I'm going to ask you to accept a series of commitments to do during this week. So get ready, okay? So later on in the service, I'm going to tell you what these are, and I'm going to ask you if you're willing to take the Matthew 25 challenge, which is an assignment for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday of this week. And so what we're going to do is we're going to jump over, and Matthew 25 is during Passion Week. So this is the week, the last week of Jesus' earthly ministry before his death and resurrection. And in Matthew 25, there are actually three parables. We're going to look at the third one. But in these three parables, they're about accountability. The first one is the 10 virgins or the 10 bridesmaids. 5 of them were ready for the bride to come. 5 of them were not. And so Jesus says at the end of this parable, he says, therefore keep watch because you do not know the day or the hour. Okay, the next one is the parable of the talents. And so one person got 10 talents. One talent is like a bag of gold, okay? So one got 10 talents, one got 5 talents, one got 1 talent. And then the 10 guy doubled his money for the master while the master was away. The 5 guy doubled his money, but the 1 guy, he was afraid. He didn't want to use his talent, so he buried it. And when he gave it back and said, you gave me 1 talent, here's your 1. After 10 years, it could have been 10 years of interest. Instead, it's still just 1 talent. And so Jesus said, what the master did is he said, take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. So those two were a call to commitment. They were a call to say, you need to give your life to Jesus, give your life to the kingdom. But the third of these parables is a little bit different. Because this parable, it doesn't have a call to commitment. What it says is, the day is going to come. That's the day of judgment. And at that time, it's too late. You don't have time to make a decision then. The decision if you're going to make a decision, you need to make it now. Because when the day of judgment comes, it'll be too late. The accountability will have already started. Now, these are parables. So in parables, you have the concept in interpreting parables is to take the big picture. There's one big storyline in parables. And unfortunately, kind of throughout history, sometimes people have tried to pick apart the parable. Well, this means this means this means that. But really, the concept is just take the big idea and go with it. And so all 3 of these parables are about accountability and the coming of the end. Today, we're going to look at the parable of the sheep and the goats. And this is part of the Olivet Discourse, which is the discourse that Jesus gave on the Mount of Olives overlooking Jerusalem. So if you will, then, take out your bare notes, and we're going to walk through this passage together, and then we'll draw some application from it. So, we're just going to walk through the key ideas of this passage, because it's kind of a long passage, okay? So let's start with this. Jesus will one day separate the sheep from the goats, okay? That's where we're going to begin today. That's kind of what this whole story is about, that one day, Jesus is going to separate the sheep from the goats. And we're going to start in verse 31 and read the first few verses. So here we go. When the Son of Man comes in his glory. Okay, so Jesus usually described himself as the Son of Man. That was his favorite description of himself. When he comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. Now, let's just pause for a minute here. Jesus is saying to his disciples and all those who are listening, by the way, when I come in my glory, I'm going to bring all the angels of heaven with me, and I'm going to sit on the throne that rules the earth. Now, some people have said Jesus was just a good teacher, really. Now, let me ask you a question. What good teacher would say, I'm going to come back as king of the universe, and I'm going to bring all the angels of heaven with me? Right? No good teacher would ever say that. Any person who says that, you're probably going to lock them up in an insane asylum or something like that. You can't say that Jesus was a good teacher. Either he's who he said he was or he was crazy. Those are the only two choices you get. Okay, so let's start over. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. And all the nations, now that word nations is the word ethne in Greek. It's like ethnics, okay? The ethnic people. Because see, these are Jewish people. And Jewish people had a name for everybody who wasn't Jewish. They were the ethnics, okay? And so all the ethnic people out there, everybody who's not one of us, they're all going to be there. Every tribe, every nation, every people group, every language group in the world. He's saying that every group of people everywhere, they're all going to be at the final judgment. Okay, all the nations, all the ethne will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Okay, so that's how this parable begins. There's going to be a time when everybody's going to be separated into believers and non-believers. All right, now next, Jesus will bless the sheep for their ministry. Now this is where it gets kind of interesting, because Jesus is going to have this special blessing for those who've had a ministry of Jesus Christ in the world. And so in verse 34, he says, then the king, okay, Jesus is now calling himself the king, okay, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. And so he said, I prepared this for you before the world was even created. I knew I was going to bring all of my people together, and I was going to let them inherit this great blessing. And it's for their ministry. Because here's what he says. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. And I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. And I was a stranger, and you invited me in. And I needed clothes, and you clothed me. And I was sick, and you looked after me. And I was in prison, and you came to visit me. He's saying, you're going to have this great inheritance because you've had this fabulous ministry, this opportunity to help people, this caring that you've done throughout history. All of you have just done such a great job in loving the people of our world. And that means, next thing, the sheep will be surprised because they're surprised about this. They're like, what? See, all these people are lined up. All these sheep and goats are all lined up expecting to go through the pearly gates. They're all lined up ready to come in, and then all of a sudden, something weird happens. The goats get on one side, the sheep on the other, and then he tells the sheep, hey, I'm going to surprise you. You guys have had an awesome ministry. That's what he's saying. Verse 37, then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry? It's like, what ministry you're talking about? We don't get it. When did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison or go to visit you? See, they're all lined up at the judgment. They assumed that it was going to kind of be something a little different. But what he's congratulating them for is for their caring concern for the people of this world, the people that God created. And so, at the bottom then, serving others is actually serving Jesus. The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Now, some people have looked at this passage. Remember, it's a parable, so we're looking at big picture here. But some people looked at this passage saying, does that mean that that's how people get saved? Is that if they do enough good works and they add all their works and they get to 1,000 or 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 or whatever, then they get in? Is that how it works? No, that's not how it works. Because 2 weeks ago, we looked at the theological heart of the New Testament, Romans chapter 3. And there we learned that people are saved through justification by faith alone. That it is through our faith in Jesus' shed blood on the cross for us that purchases for us redemption. So that's how people are saved. But what Jesus is doing is he's saying everybody who is truly a person of faith in Jesus, every person who is truly a believer, this is what they do. This is what they do. They help people. They help the poor. They feed the hungry. They clothe those who don't have clothes. That's what they do. It's just a natural thing. This is what people of faith look like, Jesus is saying. It's just natural. And in some amazing way, as we help other people who are made in the image of God, we are actually helping Jesus himself. Let's look on the next page, because now there's another surprise. The goats will be surprised also. They're all lined up. They all think they're going through the pearly gates, apparently. And then he will say to those on the left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, you did not look after me." And they will also answer like, "What? Lord, when did we see?" See, they call him Lord. I mean, they're followers to some degree. "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you?" And he will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." And then they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. You see, they were religious people, but their religiosity did not change their lives. It didn't make a difference for them. They were, in fact, you go to any place, anywhere in the world, people are religious. I don't know what the percentage is, but I'm guessing it's about 99% of people in our world are religious. It's lower in the U.S. and Europe, Western Europe. But everywhere else in the world, about 99% of people are religious people. They're religious. They're like, hey, we're doing the religious stuff. But what Jesus said is that it wasn't making a difference. It didn't change their heart. These don't look like people of faith. They might think they're people of faith, but it never made a difference. So they're not part of the kingdom of heaven. So this whole passage is saying that what we need to sensitize our lives about is caring for people who need care. So that's why we're going to do the Matthew 25 challenge. So here's what I want us to do. I want us to look at this booklet that I have. We have one for each family, hopefully, to take home. If you don't have one of these booklets sitting on the chair, just raise your hand. We've got a bunch of extras right there. Did anybody? Okay. If you need one, just raise your hand and we will get those to you. There we go. So this is an emphasis that World Vision put together. I found it to be very helpful, and so I wanted to share it with you. And so this is what we're going to do. If you're willing, this is what we're going to do this week. So if you will, open to the first page after the cover, which is Monday. So this has an assignment for all 6 days of this coming week until next Sunday. So let's read through the first page. We won't read through all of them, but we'll do the first page just so you can kind of get the idea of what this is going to be. So Monday, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. What's the challenge? Skip lunch and break your fast tonight with rice and beans. Let's read what it says. So here's kind of some things to read morning, noon, and evening. Every day, 16,000 children under the age of 5 die in our world. Most of them from preventable causes. Nearly half are malnourished. Through World Vision, child sponsors make a difference in the lives of vulnerable children and their families, ensuring that they have the food they need to grow, flourish, and reach their potential. As you go without lunch today, pray for all the children in the world who don't have enough to eat. Fasting is a great way to clear distractions so that you can hear God's voice, and prayer opens your heart and mind to receive what He's got to say. You're likely to be tired this afternoon, and you'll definitely be hungry. But this experience is well worth the time and sacrifice. We hope it gives you a glimpse into the hardship that hungry kids face daily and helps your family connect with God in a fresh way. Okay, so here's noon. Now that it's noontime, instead of eating, take a look around and consider how much food is available to you. Do you think about that? You know, in other countries, almost half the world struggles getting enough food to eat. Almost half of the population of our world. And yet for us, we could be I mean, think about all the food we have available. We could be buried in food. We throw away more food that has the little expiration labels gone off. We throw away more food than many people have food for in a month, you know? Okay. While fasting, make some tea and read the following story about a boy named Ekai. When you're done, remember to pray for kids like Ekai throughout your day. Okay, so here's his story. 12-year-old Ekai's family only has enough food for one meal a day, dinner. Every morning in Kenya, his stepmom boils water to make tea. While tea isn't much of a breakfast, he's grateful for the hot drink to wake up to. Next page. Ekai looks forward to dinner every day. Most often it's porridge, which he loves. Sometimes, however, dinner is special. On days when the government or World Vision distributes food, his family gets to eat beans and either corn or rice. Although Ekai eats dinner most nights, one time he went 2 whole days without food. Sometimes when there's no food in the house, his stepmom sends him out to the neighbors to eat, but she never goes. If there's no food, she just doesn't eat. Ekai knows that there are worse things than being hungry, but someday he hopes to help his family to be able to afford breakfast and maybe even lunch. Okay, so that's the challenge. Are you up for it? On Monday, it's to fast for lunch that day. Okay, let's look at Tuesday. We'll kind of zoom through the rest of these. On Tuesday, I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. By the way, on our orphanage in India that we support, we came and gathered a group of kids with a lady there who was just taking them into her home, and these kids didn't have enough to eat. In fact, they didn't have anything to eat. They were just wandering the roads trying to find scraps. And so the reason they have food is because we provide for them 3 great meals every day. And our kids, I always thought that maybe our kids, I've shared this with you before, that the 50 kids in our orphanage, that they might kind of be looked down upon at school because, you know, they're the orphan kids. But actually, they're looked up to at their school because they're the ones who always come to school fed and clean and have their homework done. And our kids are all making straight A's because they've got food in their stomach, which helps their brain think. And so it's a huge impact upon entire societies when societies have enough food to eat. Okay, so now we're talking about water, and this is another big deal. So the challenge on Tuesday is to drink only water. Okay, so this may be the hardest one for many of you, okay? Now, on the second paragraph there, it says, now think about the fact that 844 million people around the world live without access to clean water. On average, they have to walk 6 kilometers, that's 3.7 miles, to get water that often isn't clean. And the chore mainly falls to women and children. Some of you who have traveled in Africa or been on mission trips there, you've noticed that it's the women and children who are always going out to get water. And children cannot carry much water. Water weighs 8 pounds, 8 pounds per gallon. And so you're talking about walking 3 miles there and 3 miles back with just for a little tiny bit of water. And so at the bottom there, it says 5-year-old Cheru lives in Kenya. Every day she helps her family by walking 6 kilometers to collect dirty water. Because she's so little, all she can carry is a tea kettle. The 3-hour walk also makes her miss school. Let's flip 2 more pages. So that's the challenge for Tuesday. So for Wednesday, I was a stranger and you invited me in. What's the challenge? Are you ready? Sleep on the floor tonight. Here we go. Okay. Now let me just say, don't do anything your doctor would not want you to do, okay? We don't want to have injuries from this week. So anyway, you take responsibility for yourself on doing what you feel like is appropriate for you. So these are, there are many people in our world who get run out of their villages, out of their homes, and have no place to sleep. So they just sleep on the ground. We have a family in our church, Imad and Wafa, who were in Iraq when ISIS came in a few years ago. ISIS knocked on every door of every home in that little village, mostly a Christian village, and they said, you have 30 minutes to make your decision. You have 3 choices. You can leave, you can become a Muslim, or you can die. You have 30 minutes to make your choice. They just put stuff in their arms and ran. She had a little 2-month-old baby at the time. Off they go, and they slept on the ground for many days following that. This is true for people all over the world and even in the United States sometimes. And so we're going to do this one night, sleep on the floor one night, and hopefully gain a better understanding of their plight. Let's look on Thursday. You ready? I needed clothes, and you clothed me. Okay, this is an interesting one. On Thursday, what's the challenge? Wear the same clothes you wore yesterday. So some of you are like, hey, that's no big deal. I do that all the time. Okay. But you might be thinking about what you're going to wear on Wednesday, okay? Because this is going to go one more day. um, the second paragraph there says, today wearing the same clothes as yesterday may seem simple, but it'll remind you that others must go on for days, even weeks without changing their clothes or taking a shower. So imagine if you didn't have clean water, what water are you going to use to clean with, to wash clothes? I mean, if the only water you have, if you're struggling to get enough drinking water, you're going to be reluctant to use any water for cleaning clothes. Okay, Friday. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison. You came to visit me. What's the challenge? Reach out to someone going through a difficult time. So you might be thinking about all week long, who's somebody that I know that's having a difficult run of things, and what can I do to reach out to them on Friday? All right, one more, Saturday. On Saturday, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. So what's the challenge? Take a 30-minute prayer walk. Take a 30-minute prayer walk. In the second paragraph there, it says, as you take a prayer walk today, reflect on what you've learned and felt this week, and ask God to show you what to do next and how to show his love to these brothers and sisters. Invite any friends or family who did the challenge with you to come along on your prayer walk. So next week, I hope we get to hear some stories about some things that you did and what it meant to you and what it meant to your family. And so at the end of the service today, I'm going to ask you, if you're willing to take the challenge, to write it on your communication card. We're going to see a little video now of some people who took this challenge.
Then the king would say to those on his right, come, you are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invited you in, or needing clothes and clothed you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.
The Matthew 25 challenge was a transformational moment for my family and I. There was one particular day when the challenge was to sleep on the floor. And I walked by my daughter's room, and she was already there on her sleeping bag, reading her Bible.
The Matthew 25 challenge was an incredibly spiritual experience for me personally. God was teaching us different things every day, and sharing it with each other was really exciting.
Well, when it came to the Water Day challenge, 3 words come to mind: caffeine, withdrawal, headaches. Going without coffee all day was a lot harder than I thought. I'd get these headaches, but every time I did, it would remind me of the 6-kilometer walk that women and children have to do to get unclean water.
My first thought was, this will be easy. I grew up missing meals and sleeping on the floor, but my daughters, not so much. They were challenged to come out of their Wi-Fi life and actually experience what kids around the world experience every single day.
Okay, now let's look at some application that we can learn from this passage. You ready? Number 1, I need to be prepared for my accountability. I need to be prepared for my accountability. In this story about the talents, God, by the way, that's the talent. A talent then was it like a bag of gold, but that's where we get our English word talent is from this parable. That our abilities and that sort of thing. So this one guy gets 10, one gets 5, one gets 1. The guy with 1 didn't use his talent. His talent was taken and given to the guy who really used his, the greatest. And so it's a message of accountability. We've got a chance to use what we have, our talents, abilities, time, everything. And how are we going to use those to make a difference for people? Let's look on the back. Number 2, when I have been redeemed, I will love to redeem. When I have truly been redeemed, I will really love to help redeem others. It's just natural. When people love God, it is just natural for them to want to bring God to someone else. When people's lives have been transformed, it is just natural for them to want to help bring life transformation to others. In 1 John 4, this is what John talks about. He says, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who has been born of God and everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God." It's just natural. When you know God, love just seeps out. Whoever does not love God, does not know God, because God is love. I want to share a word about how Christianity conquered the Roman Empire. In Caesarea, this was a couple of centuries after Jesus, famine and war had afflicted Caesarea. And then this plague came. And so the populace that was already weakened by famine was now, destroyed by this plague. Well, Eusebius, the Christian historian, recorded that all day long, some of the Christians tended to the dying and to their burial. So see, when this plague came, all the rich people left town and left the dying people there. It is even recorded that people left their own family members. In other words, there's 5 family members, 2 of them got the plague. The other people, they just say, well, good luck, we're out of here. And they would just leave them there to die. You know what the Christians did? They stayed so that they could help these people die well and bury them appropriately. Well, countless numbers of these people with no one to care for them. Others gathered together from all parts of the city, a multitude of those withered from famine, and they distributed bread to them all. And then Eusebius goes on to state that because of their compassion in the midst of this plague, the Christians' deeds were on everyone's lips, and they glorified the God of the Christians. And then, over in Rome, the last pagan emperor, Julian the Apostate, he saw the compassion of Christians. In fact, he was talking to the pagan priest of their Roman religion, and he said, this is what Julian wrote. He said, he wrote this to a pagan priest. He said, "When it came about that the poor were neglected and overlooked by our priest, then I think the impious Galileans," that's what he called the Christians, the impious Galileans observed this fact and devoted themselves to helping them. Then he wrote, "They support not only their own poor, but ours as well. And all men see that our people lack aid from us." And then he tries to get the pagan priests to kind of be like Christians. Like, why don't you guys take up the slack and help people like the Christians do? But there's 2 theological problems about why the pagan priests would not do that. One is that we have a faith, we have a God that we're willing to die for. And they didn't have that. Number 2 is that we have a theological belief that all people are created in the image of God and therefore deserve dignity and honor in the way that we treat them. And so, not many years after Julian the Apostate, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. Number 3, I can find Jesus everywhere. I can find Jesus everywhere. That's what Jesus was saying, you serve a person, you're serving me. You can find me everywhere. In Matthew 25:40, the king will reply, "Truly, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Now, there's kind of 2 different senses here that I pick up. One is that each person is made in the image of God. So when we look at people, we recognize that they too were made in the image of God, even if they reject God. But a second thing is that there's some inexplicable way that when we serve people, we are serving Jesus. And so I don't understand how that works. Let's just hold on to that as a truth in our hearts. And then number 4, you ready? I will be surprised. Remember, the sheep were surprised, the goats were surprised. I will be surprised by the significance of my ministry. I will be surprised by the significance of my ministry. One day, you're going to find out about all the people that you influenced for the Lord, and you're going to be surprised. Just like the mustard seed. In Matthew 13, Jesus said, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. And though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. I want to tell you about a lady that I met this week while we were on the mission trip to Jackson. I went with my sister to her church, which was a new church plant that started a few years ago. And they decided intentionally to have their church target area to be in a distressed area of town, kind of like the area that our kids worked in this week in inner city Jackson. And so they began this church there. They had about 90 people, and they were investing in the community. And so this lady, Sherry, was sitting across from me at the potluck dinner, and so she was telling me all this. So anyway, her ministry at that point was the ministry of prayer, because she was praying. She felt like, and they felt like together, that they needed to start a school because all these kids were underperforming educationally. So if they could start a private school for them, that would be awesome. However, how do you start a private school when nobody can pay? When everybody's poor and nobody can pay, you're going to have that thing funded and endowed. And so they just prayed that God would provide the money. So one day, a couple of years later, Sherry gets a phone call. The phone call said, I'm the administrative assistant for a philanthropist in California, and he would like to invest in your area, and he wondered if you had something he could invest in. And she's like, maybe. Okay, so she was like, well, how in the world did you get my phone number? And said, here's the story. So he was flying back on his private jet from Africa, where he had been doing some philanthropy. He was one of the founders of Taco Bell, so he had, he's a gazillionaire, okay. And so he was flying back from Africa where he had done some philanthropy, and he just thought, all of my philanthropy is in other countries. I should probably do something in America too. So he settled on Mississippi, and so he said to his assistant, you know anybody in Mississippi? He said, no, but I think my aunt might know somebody. She works for a church in Seattle, and you know how those churches are. They have contacts everywhere. So she called her aunt, and her aunt looked up in her denomination the phone number of the person who's in charge of disaster relief for the state of Mississippi, and it happened to be Sherry. So that's how she got Sherry's phone number. And anyway, so he came out to visit, and he looked at the area, and so he gave several $1 million to get this thing started, because they would need the kind of endowment so that there could be long-term care for these kids. They wanted the kids to pay at least $20 or so to for their school per month, but all the rest of the expenses were going to have to be borne by someone else. So he gave that, and then he was on his deathbed a year ago, and he passed away. But he left money for them to build an entirely new facility, and so that school can run on for the next 100 years. Now see, sometimes we get to hear those stories that happen because of our prayer, but most of the time we don't. But one day, when you get to heaven, you're going to find out. You're going to be surprised at all the influence that your work, that your prayers, that your love had on people around this world. Now we're going to do a challenge, okay? This week, we're going to do the Matthew 25 challenge. I'm planning to do it. I'm planning to do every day, whatever it takes, okay? And so I want to ask you if you will join me in this. And you have this card, which is our communication card. On the back, if you are willing to do the challenge with me, just write the word challenge on there, and be sure and put your name on the front so I can know who you are, okay? And put the word challenge on there, and I'll be praying for you as you go through this week. And my hope is during this week that it will sensitize us to the plight of the needy in our world. We are the most blessed country in the world. We are the most blessed people in the world. How can we use our blessings to bless others? Well, we have to be sensitive. We have to be sensitive of what their needs are. And my prayer is that during this week, we would become sensitive to that. So write on the word challenge if you're in. Now, I want to share one more thing, and we're going to talk more about this next week, but just in case you're on vacation or something next week, I wanted to go ahead and bring it in here. And I was thinking too, how can we do one ministry that can help people for the long haul? And it's one thing to give people fish, right? But it's a better thing to teach them how to fish, right? So that they have food forever. And so one of our ministries is the ministry of our sewing ministry in India. And we have these wonderful ladies. Many of them are young widows, like this girl whose husband died when she was like 16. It's a fisherman's colony. Many of the men die young there. The girls marry at 14, 15, or 16. And then while they're still teenagers, they're widows. And so they're stuck, And so what we've been doing is we've been buying every woman who graduates from their sewing school. And Junior's going to be here this summer, so maybe he can come by and see us. So we'll see if that works out. But we've been buying a sewing machine for each one so that they have their own sewing machine and they can start their own business in their home. Or you see right here, they're holding up these certificates. Each person who has a certificate, that means they've graduated from the 4-month school. If they take that certificate to a particular sewing company, they are guaranteed to be employed by that sewing company. They can automatically have a job. So Junior Sewing School, we provide everything for this school, and one of the things we do is have these sewing machines. Well, I was thinking, we need to make sure that we have these sewing machines forever, right? So here's what I want to ask you to do, if you're willing, to say if you would be willing to buy a sewing machine once a year for the next several years. Or maybe you'd be willing to buy 2 or 5 sewing machines or whatever. They're $100, and we need 50 per year. Okay, so he graduates about 50 women per year. So we need 50 sewing machines per year. If you would be willing to give 1 or 2 or more, write that on here too. Put it on there. 2 sewing machines per year for the next several years. And that can be a part of our mission, of our Matthew 25 challenge, that we are saying together, we're going to make sure that these ladies, 50 every year, move out of poverty into a sustainable business environment. Well, the Matthew 25 challenge, here we go. My hope is that we see some great things happen this week. Let's pray. Our Father, we come to take this challenge, and we recognize, Lord, that it is on your heart that we become sensitive people to the needs of people created in the image of God all over our world. And so, Lord, this week, sensitize us. Make us aware. Let us understand who you are and what you want us to do, how we can use our talents to make a difference in the world. In Jesus' name.